20-0442, discussion, election update, sponsored by Commissioner Hausman.
Yes, thank you. I see Director Barron and Chairman Mary Kay Clooney coming down. I think we're all well aware of what happened in our election cycle for the general election primary. We heard a lot of public comment this morning. Thank you both for coming to give us an assessment of where we are and hopefully what the next steps are going to be. And I appreciate both of you being here, but I would assume that Mr. Barron would be giving most of the information for us. All right, thank you.
I'll leave him a minute or two. Since the election, the board and our elections director have been determined to be able to present to ourselves, to the chairman's task force, and to this board what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what we're going to do to fix it. We appreciate having the task force and the opportunity to present information to them so that a dispassionate assessment can be made and determinations are made. And I'm concerned that the information that has been out in the community has not really taken account of some of the factors that we have determined so far. We know what went wrong. The absentee ballot process did not work. We had too few polling places, too few staff, too few hours per day until the very end, and undertrained staff in long lines. And we also had 45 polling place changes necessitated by the coronavirus. Polling places opened late. Long lines started even before the polling places opened and remained very, very long throughout the day and into the night. But we have found out some things that were made available to us by many voters and interested parties, and which actually went back to August the 15th, 2019, and the court order entered by U.S. District Judge Amy Totenberg. I actually had a copy of that 153-page order. I actually had yellow highlighted some of it, and I very quickly found that the court at that time said, the court is concerned whether the state is prepared to fully implement the new system statewide in all 159 Georgia counties in time for the March 2020 presidential preference primary as promised and provided for in the contract with its selected vendor, Dominion Voting Systems. The process thus far has already suffered from delays and modifications that are not insignificant in judging the Secretary of State's capacity to fulfill its statutory obligation of providing the uniform system of electronic ballot markers and ballot scanners for use in each county statewide. Starting with that, we then looked at the promised timeline and the actual timeline between equipment promised and equipment delivered and equipment trained to the poll workers, and found gap after gap after gap, which I will not bore you with, but that equipment did not get there, and that equipment had some significant problems. I won't say flaws, but we found at the very last minute that this equipment required additional electric capacity and additional plugs and outlets that our traditional polling places just did not have, and therefore we were unable to open our polling places on time, and when they did open, our poll managers were unable to get the equipment up and running. We found that there were big problems with the poll pads. We found that the one uniform password that was supposed to be used throughout the county was operative in some polling places, but not others. We found a number of problems in this way. We have collected issues with that equipment, and we think that the task force should take a look at that and assess it before a final determination is to be made. In addition to the equipment problem, we looked at the absentee ballot initiative, of which there were, one way of looking at it is two parts. One is ballots received by mail, that is, written ones that were put in an envelope, as I did, and then there are the emailed ones, and that our department was totally bogged down by the email ones, and we found out why. They all came in under various PDFs, JPEGs, whatever, including emails that had 3 or 4 ballots attached to the one email. And the county's IT department told our director that no mature organization would have sent out those applications and invited people to do it by email. If it were to be done, it should have been done by having portals, the way that Amazon takes your order, which is you get online, it asks you for your name, address, and what you want, and then it takes it, it has it in a uniform format, and it can redeliver it. We are continuing to have problems with emailed ballot applications. Why do I bother saying this? This is yesterday. We are determined to fix these problems before August the 9th. We require the cooperation of the state. I hope we have it. But we have to recognize that there were problems that were beyond our control. I haven't mentioned the real problem beyond our control, and that, of course, was the pandemic. You, of course, know that 40 of our polling places declined to serve, some of them at the very last minute. You have been told that 6 out of 7 of our early voting poll workers declined to serve for those reasons, and we had to scramble. For those things, we think we have a solution, and that is basically to do whatever it takes to get enough polling places and to keep them locked in through August, when I expect we will still have a problem with the pandemic, and to recruit younger poll workers who are willing to work under different conditions, including the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. hours that we had to implement. Those things we can do, those are within our control. The others require the cooperation of the state, and we intend to seek it. The final comment that I want to make is that we think that our staff worked very hard and very well. We think that we were dealt a pretty bad hand, and nonetheless, we should be ready, I think we are ready, to certify our votes on Friday, even though at this point it is very questionable whether any of the other metro counties will be able to do so. Another thing that we've done to fix the problem, which Mr. Barron has initiated, is to have roundtables with other metro counties who have reported the same problems. And I have collected the news articles about their problems, which were substantially identical to ours. And we are going to work out a way to be able to communicate these to the Secretary of State and find solutions that will perhaps be useful statewide. In terms of actual recommendations to be made, Mr. Barron, of course, is most qualified to do that.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thanks for having me. You know, my department and I share everyone's frustration. You're unhappy, the voters of the county are unhappy, and we're unsatisfied with how things went. We're working hard to make sure that what happened has no repeat performance. Many voters experienced frustration, and we prepared for this election under unprecedented circumstances. We faced many challenges. We're undertaking a review process. We are working with county manager and executive leadership to look at a number of different ways to improve going forward. We need to ensure that all Fulton County voters are enfranchised and with accessible, equitable, safe, and a smooth election process in the fall. And this starts with making changes for August in advance of November. We're looking at the pain points that we had. We need to determine which successes we had in previous elections and those that we had this time and move forward with those. We're looking to develop some mitigation strategies for dealing with the pandemic in the fall, which will still be here, and we're looking at a list of potential actions to address the causes of some of those things. The main pain points: processing absentee applications submitted by email. We had the 45 polling place changes. As Mary Carroll mentioned, we lost several hundred, 400 to 500 poll workers. We had no in-person training. It was all done by video. We had fewer early voting sites than normal. We had planned on having 22 to 24 for this election. We ended up having 5 to begin, 8 in the end. We had malfunctioning equipment, some due to training issues, some, as Mary Carroll mentioned, with passwords that didn't work, poll pads switching precincts, poll pads shutting down, reverting to the PPP. We had inexperienced new poll workers, which led to setup and operational challenges. We also had long lines. There was high turnout in some part, much higher turnout in some parts of the county than the other. We had the distance restrictions. To keep some polling places, we had to agree to strictly enforce the CDC guidelines, no more than 10 people in the polling place. So, the things that we have to do going forward are to return our full complement of early voting locations. In order to do that, we're going to have to pay a premium. We started out with $34 per day in addition to their hourly rate. We got up to $84 per day because after week 2, when we were going to expand to 7 to 7, we almost lost a quarter of the early voting workforce because they had only agreed 9 to 4:30. We went to 7 to 4:30, and then we were going to 7 to 7. By the last day, we were paying $150 a day hazard pay premium to get more people to work. We need to do the outreach sites again in the fall, and we're going to have to use all the libraries. Some of those weren't available in the PPP as we know. We will need to do an online portal submission for absentee ballot applications. This is a key. I've talked to many people around the country. That online portal should have been set up by the Secretary of State before they mailed out these ballots. No mature organization would set up a transactional business at this volume and tell people to do business by email. It's not the way to do it. And we had issues with email. So I've already talked about setting up a portal here for Fulton County voters to do it. I've begun a discussion with the IT director on that. And we know that it was a well-intentioned to send out absentee by mail applications to everyone. We agreed with it, but with regard to processing the applications via the Postal Service, we didn't have any issues with that. All the issues came through the email. So if you do any business with the county, you do the homestead exemptions, you apply for appeal, You go to DDS to renew your driver's license, you get a car tag. Those are all done by online portals. Because you need an intake mechanism, and you also need a way to track, and you need a confirmation. We didn't have any of that ability with the email applications. So we need to drive at least 80% of the voters to early voting and absentee by mail, because we anticipate a 75% turnout, which would then mean that we're probably going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 600,000 voters in the fall, which is about 160,000 more than the successful 2016 election that we administered. And we had 64%, 59% vote early in that one, 5% vote by mail. This time, we need to get that up to 80%. We need to change the model for paid experienced poll workers, get a technical integration team for early voting and election day, along with the financial inducements for the election day locations to return to service. I've already asked my staff to go out and go back to all these polling places that said no, to see if we can decontaminate their facilities afterwards, some way to get them back, because we went from 198 locations down to 164, and that we had a lot of voters assigned to too few locations. We need to use more data on voter stats to predict the turnout, to forecast going forward. I've already talked to the other big metro counties about standing operating procedures, about developing a training curriculum that the 4 metro counties will use. Because after speaking with them, they all have the same issues that we did. So we need to work with them in order to get some best practices. And I think if the 4 metro counties are all on board and we're working together as a team, it'll help us going forward. There are lots of other little details. We definitely need a dedicated training facility. We are going to need a dedicated call center for early voting and absentee by mail. We had a very small call center this time, and that hampered us on election day. We need a central processing warehouse for all the absentee by mail applications we're going to have to process, and also have that in order to receive all of those ballots that we mail. And we need a significant increase in staffing to handle the 100-fold increase we had in absentee by mail processing. In 2016's general primary, we received 947 absentee ballots. This time, as of this morning, we had already scanned in 87,960. We had a 27.6% turnout versus this year versus 13.7 in 2016. We processed 143,019 applications. We had 260,280 voters, and 5,421 voters either canceled their absentee ballot application or canceled their ballots, which is about 2.5%. And other than that, I can take questions.
Okay, so let me tell you where we are, I think, here. Commissioner Ellis, Commissioner Morris, Commissioner Houseman, Commissioner Hall, and Commissioner Arrington.
Yes.
Mr. Ellis.
Well, Mr. Chair, Mrs. Commissioner Hausman's discussion item, and then she was in here before I was, and she wants to continue.
You know what, I'm happy to allow questions, and I've got a list, but you go ahead, and then I'll ask.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I appreciate the update. I'd like to hear, candidly, and I think a lot of our citizens would too, like to hear a little bit more accountability on the two of yours part, as opposed to the blame elsewhere. We've read a lot about that, okay? So I guess we got these two big issues, the events of last Tuesday and then the absentee ballots. And I want to talk about the absentee ballots first. So I believe I heard you say that there were about 140,000 ballots applications that were accepted and sent out. Is that correct?
143,000, yes, applications.
143. We've scanned, you said about 88,000?
Yes, so far.
And about 5,000 that folks voided them or whatnot?
Yes.
Okay, so it's about, what, 48,000 that are just sort of unaccounted for?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, I certainly bore witness to the complete bungling of this absentee ballot process by personally spending over at least 40 hours worth of time following up on the behalf of constituents to get ballots. Here's just an example, you know, and others did as well. Didn't receive an absentee ballot, despite sending and resending the application 7 times beginning on the March 15th. Got tired of calling published Fulton County voter registration phone numbers that were inoperable. Contacted you, contacted my senator, contacted the Secretary of State. That office followed up with Fulton County many, many times on my behalf. With all of this, I have no ballot, even as Fulton County tells me it was mailed on May 29th. The phone numbers attached to those emails are also inoperable. And I got story after story after story of those things. And, you know, these are just, when I'm following up and I got a staff member telling me, yes, it's been mailed, it should be to them, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, it never shows up. And we've got something in the neighborhood of, 40,000+ people who just never see them. Not to mention, who knows what the number is of ballots that maybe just never even got processed. So, embedded within just that short context of what I shared with you there's some basic customer service issues that don't have diddly to do with the state. Mm-hmm. They are our responsibility, okay? And so, and we've had such a focus on customer service within the county as a whole. And I think, kind of part of, everybody's frustration around this is, certainly the obvious because, it affected people's, ability to vote, in such an important, which is such an important thing, but it also just embarrassed, kind of this whole county in the efforts that we have placed behind things as basic as customer service. Not excusing kind of the other factors were at play, but the ability to have somebody dedicated to look at an email, to respond to a phone call, that could have been handled outside of, COVID-19. We had a number of employees that have been sitting here that weren't working, that we were paying, that, you could have accessed or chosen to kind of engage. Whatever it was with this, large batch of just sort of, stuff that came into email that just sat for months. I mean, as I understand it, right, about a month before some of this stuff got looked at, and then
No, they were being processed all the time.
there were 3,000 emails that got trapped in our vault system. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and they get in our vault because after an email sits for 30 days.
Right.
Right, so they sat for 30 days, which is indicative of kind of the issues that were here before you came when we had this pile of voters registration stuff that was sitting in somebody's office that piled up. Right? I mean, it's like there had to have been, when these come in, we knew we had them to come in the email. Somebody knew it, right? And I mean, why there wasn't priority to these things are getting addressed. I mean, there's no excuse for that. That's management, okay? Put aside all the other stuff that we talked about. I'm trying to focus in on some things that were really more within our span of control. We're also learning and hearing that these letters that we're notifying people of precinct changes, right? That they were postmarked, May 22nd, and now I'm seeing, pictures on Twitter and Facebook and all that sort of stuff where people are getting their letters now. Okay, I know there are problems with the U.S. mail, but I don't think they're this bad. Which indicates to me that, we do not have some sort of process in place to manage getting out mass quantities of mail. And that was sort of an epic fail, okay? But nonetheless, I mean, these trends where the absentee ballots, they're going to be high probably certainly for this particular election cycle. And we've got to figure out a way to get this addressed. Task force are nice and all that sort of stuff, but we ain't got a lot of time. You know, if you're saying we should have had a portal and the state should have said it and all that sort of stuff, then we should have anticipated as well. So you know that. So that needs to be getting done certainly pronto. We've got to have some sort of system where people can actually see real time how many of these things have come in. What about my individual thing? Has it been approved? Has it been sent? Has it been sent? What did I send back? Has it been received? Has it been counted? Right? And people need to understand how to do that, and it's got to work, right? So there's got to be transparency into that piece of it. And going with this thing with the postal stuff, somebody's got to get in touch with the Postal Service. Did we work with them? I understand that there's some sort of entire kit and dedicated website for election mail with the post office.
Yeah, we have a liaison that we work with the Postal
We
Service.
better get a new one. I'm dead serious. I mean, I have no idea what happens with this mail. I mean, if it's gone that long, I mean, that's crazy. And that piece of it needs to get flushed out, you know, pronto. Because I mean, we're just tossing. Not only we miss on the absentee ballots, but we're also just tossing away good money after bad when we can't even get the precinct notices out. And we've got to have some clear customer service protocols and goals. Phone calls have to be answered. There can't be inoperable phone numbers sitting out there. There can't be inoperable email addresses sitting out there. There's no excuse for that. And that's got to be cleared up pronto. And you talked about the portal piece, right? So, and I want to just make just a couple of comments on this election day and in-person voting stuff. I agree with you. We got to go big on the early voting stuff. That was obviously, that was a mistake that we dialed it back as much as we did this year. Certainly, and then the absentee ballot stuff made that compounded that mistake by bringing it down. And we obviously need more consistent, better trained, and more numbers of poll workers. And I'd just like to throw something out, you know, for consideration. And I think this is going to be something that we need more consistency with that. Certainly, we've got a number of folks who have done this in the past and who worked on last Tuesday and did a phenomenal job, right? I mean, they were well trained, they knew how to run these systems, and they got people through there. So it's definitely evident that, you know, when folks are trained, these systems and processes can work and we can move people through. All right. We got 5,000 employees within this county, give or take, something like that, right? I would like for us to consider at noon the day before Election Day, we shut down county government except for any sort of essential services that are required. And all of those other folks that are involved in those things become Election Day employees. In some form or fashion, and that we go robust and deep in training these people. We've got a consistent workforce. It may be different. Some folks may not like it. My parents taught school. They learned how to drive school buses. They learned how to do a lot of stuff that they didn't really care doing, but that was just part of their job. And right now, this thing is mission critical. It's embarrassed the heck out of this county, and I think we need as many hands on deck to deal with it. And I think that's potentially, and we've got very smart people working for this county, very dedicated people working for this county that are concerned about customer service and putting ourselves in a good light. So that's something I would like to throw out for consideration, you know, to our management team and to this body. Additionally, that we truly inventory and identify every available suitable county facility and it be deemed a permanent polling location. And if we've got mega facilities, and we've been able to shut down everything and go in there the day before and start to get these things set up and get tested, that we consider, you know, kind of making some of these, you know, in essence, the jumbo precinct. You know, so you've got 2 different rooms where people can go in and that sort of stuff. And you can process a much more mass number of people coming through. Hey, I'm throwing out ideas. I didn't come here to run elections. I mean, I just want to run for election and serve in office, but I'm thrust in this situation, so I'm just going to throw this stuff out on the table because this is what, you know, the folks that I represent are sharing with me. So just please take that in that spirit. So that's just some stuff that I would really like to kind of to throw out. We need to double down on making putting a redundant level of supplies out. I understand that, or people run out of paper and that sort of stuff. I understand. I mean, I'll move it along. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is even feasible because I think all these other things may take enough time, may be robust enough and we may not be able to get to it. But we talked about, and it was briefly mentioned when we were talking about our long lines at tax offices, the concept of potentially a queuing or a text or something like that where people can be notified, that it is their time to be able to come in and vote versus having to sit if indeed sort of lines begin to back up. That may not be possible, but I'll throw that as just sort of a latter consideration. I know the jobs that everybody had were challenged, but we just, to echo a lot of the comments earlier, we just got to find a way to get this right. And, it won't be perfect, but and I know that, I know things there are always going to be unanticipated challenges, but we've got to own up to the things that are within our span of control. And that's really what I'm looking for, from our county folks. I realize that there may be issues that coming from the state, but I just want to see us own up and do well the things that are within our span of control. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, I'm being very lenient here today. I know this is a hot topic. Don't want to be disrespectful anyway. We got Morris, Houseman, Hall, Arrington, and Karn. Our rules allow for each member to speak for 10 minutes total. That was 12. Speak for 5 without being interrupted. But if what you were going to say has already been said, let's try to manage it at the time.
I'll be a lot less than 10.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Morris?
I gave Bob 2 of my 10, so I got 8. Just three points, really. First of all, Mary Carroll, I don't know if you were reading from notes or a statement with your remarks. If you were, I wonder if you could provide those to us, because I thought it was very comprehensive.
I would like to make sure they're in sentence form, but yes, I could do that very quickly.
That was great. I think you covered a lot of information that I would love to have. Thank you. Secondly, I've gotten some emails from folks, some organizations and I think they're really trying to do fundraising. They're letting people know that the Secretary of State is not going to send out absentee ballots. And when you really read what I think the announcement is, he's not going to send everybody an application like he did last time, which is probably a good thing. And we'll go back to the way where people will apply for an absentee ballot. And
Well, so much for that. I think we have made up our minds that there is such mistrust of that absentee ballot initiative that we would love to have people vote absentee by mail. But we're going to be prepared to have them revert to the 5% absentee, 95% in person, and just make sure that they're covered that way.
yeah, of course, people can apply for an absentee ballot and really don't have to give a reason, as I understand it. I've never done it.
Right.
So.
One thing I was surprised about in the many, many emails that I got was people saying, shouldn't we have no excuse needed? We do have no excuse needed.
Right, and again, there's misinformation out about that.
Yes.
And I don't know how we get to the 595, because if 50% of the people still want to show up in person that early or on August 11th, 50% may want to do.
Another thing that I absolutely propose, well, Mr. Barron did, that we have a PR initiative and hammer away saying, please vote in the 2 weeks in between the first day and the last day. At the end of the first day, I got an angry phone call. Everybody got my phone number. I got an angry phone call from a voter who said you're suppressing my rights because I had to wait so long. And when I said, had you considered coming back the next day? But that is something that we're going to have to really try to persuade voters to consider those interim 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I think that would be helpful. No, I think it would be, I don't mean that facetiously. I hope that will help. And I hope we will deal with the absentee ballot application and get those out. And I called you all many times with folks, and you all informed me that the folks in Arizona had mailed it on such and such a date, which had been weeks ago, and had never gotten there. And again, I don't know if that was the post office. I don't know whether it was that vendor, or people got the thing and thought it was junk mail and tossed it, not realizing what it was. But anyway, it could have been any of those things. But I hope we deal with that, and I hope we get them to the folks in time, and I hope people do, as much as I dislike early voting, as Rick knows. I hope lots of folks will take care of that that way. And then my last comment is, I've gotten some calls from people throughout the state, really, who are concerned about whether absentee ballots where people didn't oval in the thing properly, they might have put a check in it, they might have circled it, they might have put a check next to the oval, that those aren't being counted. Can you comment on that for the public? Because I think the law requires that if the intent's clear, you've got to count it, correct?
Yeah, the scanners, anything below 13% is probably, if there's less than a 13% mark on those ballots, I think the scanners are set not to count anything less than 13%, which would...
Inside the oval.
Yeah, even inside the oval. Now, if somebody marked something outside the oval, the scanner isn't going
Right.
to pick those up.
It's got to be done by hand.
Right. Then it's designed between the 13 and I think it's 28%, where it'll kick it back out to be reviewed. But anything less than 13 or less, that it may not be counted.
So if someone mistakenly just puts check marks next to the oval, scanner's not going to see it. No human's going to see it and try to count it? Is that what you're telling me?
No scanner, not unless there's an overvote on there, which would then prompt a review for the vote review panel to look at it. And then they would happen to come across that.
How does that comport with the law that if the intent's clear, you got to count it?
Well, I was reading through that law because we did get this morning, and I don't remember what the citation is or what the designation of that law is in the code, but if it's below a certain threshold, the scanner isn't going to pick those up.
I understand. I'm asking about the ones where they didn't put anything in the oval.
And they put it outside. Yeah, no, they go straight through the scanner. And if there's nothing in that oval, if they're marking outside of the oval.
But again, there's no process for you all to look at those.
The only way that's going to be found is we're participating in a pilot audit next week. And I guess we can find out then during that pilot audit with the state whether or not something is seen during that at that time. But unless it's either in that 13 to 14 to 28% where it could be put into a review.
I understand what you're saying, and I think I understand that really the only way to make sure every vote is counted when someone hasn't ovaled properly
Right.
is for someone to go through every single absentee ballot looking for such things.
Right. Now, if
you talk about time and people.
Right. Yeah, because people have all sorts of ways. When you hand mark a ballot, sometimes people don't mark it exactly as they should and color in the oval.
I understand.
Sometimes they circle the candidate's name, a lot of other things.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
6
3 minutes. No, his answers don't count against your time. 3 minutes. All right, Commissioner Hausman, Commissioner Hall, Commissioner Arrington, Commissioner Carn.
Yes, thank you, and thank you again for coming. I wish we weren't having this conversation. I think you probably do too. And before I ask any of my questions, I do want to make sure to acknowledge the hard work of the poll workers on Election Day and early voting, especially those that ended up working well past midnight. I don't know how many we had, but I mentioned earlier in our meeting today that I think those folks deserve extra compensation for that, and I certainly hope that we're working on that.
They do get overtime once it gets past that a 14-hour.
Yeah, I would imagine some people work 20 hours, maybe longer that day, and that's just ridiculous. So anyway, I really didn't expect to hear so much finger pointing. I was hoping to have a little more accountability, as was said earlier. So that's quite disappointing because we have to own this. So much of this, there's no other explanation than just our management. I mean, headlines like absentee ballot requests go missing in Fulton ahead of Georgia primary on May 29th have nothing to do with the state. Absolutely nothing. New machines, same pain for Fulton County voters. Headline in the AJC on June 9th has nothing to do with the state, and we know this. So, you know, I listened to some of the explanations of the reasons that just drive me crazy. The electrical requirements, for example. Did we not test those in advance? I know the state inspected every precinct in this state. Why in the world on Election Day are we discovering electrical problems?
It was mostly when the text went out, the poll workers had plugged them into the same circuit rather than using different outlets.
Again, whose problem is that?
Well, that is a training issue.
That is a training issue. In the precinct that I voted on in Election Day, when I got there before 7, there was already 100 people in line because 3 precincts had been combined into one.
Mm-hmm.
The very experienced poll manager was in a panic because she was getting error messages and she couldn't get through to get any technical help. Okay, she's on the phone talking to me, showing me the error message that she had screenshotted. Turns out she just wasn't putting the voter cards in the machine in the right way. They were upside down. Training issue. Very experienced poll manager didn't know how to insert the cards in the machine. And then she couldn't get through for help. So, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you've now discovered that we need a call center, but in a county like this, I don't know why we didn't have a call center already.
We usually use the EOC, but it wasn't available to us on Election Day, so we were in a different room that had about half the number of seats.
Yeah, Mr. Barron, over and over, the comments that I'm hearing are no sense of urgency or no sense of accountability, and I'm sorry, but that's what I'm hearing from you myself, and I'm floored by it. I really am floored by it. How much money were we budgeted for this election cycle?
We've got over 12 million for this year.
Well, the numbers I've got show close to 16 million, $15,765,000 is what we've spent on this election. And the results after that much money, I'm flabbergasted. You know, to lose absentee ballot applications, 45,000? Did I hear you say that? 45,000?
No, and look, the absentee, the emailed applications, we did have an issue with that, and that cascaded throughout the entire process. But I know for a fact I never told the AJC that we lost applications.
I heard you just say 45,000.
No, no, we processed 143,019 applications. We mailed out about 13,500 of those. The remainder were mailed out by the state's vendor runback.
I think I'll go back and tally all the emails, calls, and Facebook messages that I got from folks just telling me their experience with trying to get an absentee ballot and got no response, couldn't find out where it was, and ended up having to vote in person. So that definitely attributed to the long lines we had on election day.
It did.
You said you handled the mailed applications fine. When did you finish processing the mailed applications?
Well, we were processing them until, we still got applications up until the last day, which was, we were receiving them on the 5th, which is the legal deadline.
Well, again, I was checking on this all the time. Obviously, other commissioners were too. And we kept getting dates that you would be caught up, and then that date would turn into another date and another date and another date. So I don't know.
And we used a lot of county, we had probably usually about 50 people that were on admin leave from other departments helping us.
So part of this increased budget this time, it did include increased staffing, did it not? Was it 13 full-time positions, I believe we added to the staff this year?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. So I guess my main question, I could go through all these and I probably will have a few more, but was there anything that the department asked in resources, equipment, staff, facilities that you were not provided with?
No.
So what's the answer here? I mean, everywhere we look, there's some sort of problem.
I think with regard to the absentee by mail that were submitted by email, that is where the root cause of this, for when I've looked at this, happened. And those emails we began to process them right away. There were issues processing those. And that then had a cascade effect all the way down. It was a chain reaction, because then people that didn't get application or ballots from those then showed up in person in greater numbers. The bulk of the absentee by mail applications came via the Postal Service, but we did have issues with processing them out of the email.
I wish it was just the email ones that had problems, but I tell you that many, many, many voters contacted me that did not get them when they applied by mail.
Okay,
So
we don't. Yeah, those were, for us, none of those, I didn't get any complaints from the mail. It was, for us, it was a theme about email. We know that there were a couple of dates, and I've compared notes with some of the other counties. April 21st, at least for us, and DeKalb, and I think either Cobb or Gwinnett, it doesn't seem as though the vendor ever mailed the ballots on that date, because we have a lot of people from April 21st when the ballots were mailed, and no one got them.
They didn't get them at all?
No.
Okay, that's the first I've heard of that, because we
They're-
weren't even processing them really on April 21st.
Yeah, we had started processing, but before then, we got our first big bundle of those in on April 9th.
Well, I will tell you that the Secretary of State is doing an online portal for applications for November, so we should be prepared for a lot of absentee ballots. And some folks went ahead and selected that they would get them for the entire cycle. I think the number I've heard is 550,000 people have already done that. Not
Yeah,
in
you have to be
Fulton, but-
65 or disabled.
Correct.
to get that.
Correct. I sincerely hope that we're going to stop the finger pointing and talking about lawsuits that didn't go anywhere because the machines are implemented. So any of those lawsuits from last August really don't matter much at this point because the machines are in place. Certainly hope that we're going to do everything we can to work with the Secretary of State so that we can say with confidence that we're going to run a smooth election in November, because our voters certainly deserve that. And we certainly did not do that this time. And
I agree.
I just don't think it benefits us at all when, 157 other counties, 158 other counties managed to do this just fine. They may
Well,
have had,
that number isn't correct.
Okay,
they may have had some problems, but they managed to do it far better than we did.
just
So,
let them talk, Mr. Barron.
What's that?
Just
Oh.
let them talk. Go ahead.
Anyway,
Commissioner.
so I appreciate that there's going to be a task force, Mr. Chairman. I would like for you to allow some of the commissioners to make some suggestions for that task force,
Absolutely.
because there's some other people that are very well qualified. But I don't ever want to sit here again, having spent almost $16 million to have this kind of results and have these screaming headlines of a failure. I'm sorry, but it just points to management, in my opinion. And this is nothing new. The last few cycles have gone a lot smoother because we did put all hands on deck and assisted you in every way possible, and we thought we were doing that this time by supplementing with millions of dollars in equipment and staff. And so the finger pointing is just very disappointing.
All right, Commissioner Hall, Commissioner Arrington, Commissioner Carn.
First, I just want to say there are a lot of hardworking employees in the Department of Registrations and Elections, so there's no question about that at all. The real question is, who was ultimately responsible for the implementation of this project? And when I say this project, I mean getting these machines into the polling locations and operational and ready for the people who were there on Election Day to vote. And so I asked that question of you, Mr. Barron, and Mary, who was ultimately responsible for the implementation?
Yeah, well, no, that,
I was asked the question, and I'm going to answer the question. The state owns, chose the vendor, and delivered the voting equipment. The state undertook to write the manuals for the machines and the training for the poll workers. At that point, the county took over. The vendor in Arizona was part of the 3-point delivery system for absentee ballots. We are fully prepared and are doing it now to take responsibility for that which we had control over.
That was not a clear answer. And when you say the county, can you be very clear about who the county is? Because every constituent out here is pointing the finger at the Board of Commissioners. And when you say the county, they think it's us. And we need to be very clear on who the county is, whether that is the Department of Registrations and Elections or not. So that being said, I want to ask the county attorney if she could give us some clear and concise legal information about what authority does the Board of Commissioners have as it relates to the election process, the polling locations, the management of implementing those machines in the polling locations, and everything else to do with making sure that Election Day is set up properly so that we don't have people standing in lines for 4 to 6 hours, and we don't have issues with machines not powering on and all the other things that you've heard. And like all these emails that I've received in my office, this is a representation of people sending in complaints about what happened on Election Day. So, Madam County Attorney, can you, for our viewing public and listening public, let everyone know what authority does this body, the Board of Commissioners, have over those things?
The Board of Registration and Election controls elections in our county.
Period.
Mr. Barron is our election superintendent, and he is a direct report to the Board of Elections and Registration. Our Board of Commissioners is responsible for funding the cost of elections as requested by the Board of Registration and Elections.
And therefore, based off of what you just said, the Board of Registrations and Elections asked us for funding, And as Commissioner Hausman mentioned just a little while ago, we provided them with $16 million of funding. So we did our part based on their request. Now, the question that has been consistent through all of these emails and people coming up to me on the street and texting me and calling me, DMing me, Facebook messaging me, is what authority does the Board of Commissioners have as it relates to terminating the Director of the Department of Registrations and Elections?
You have no authority to terminate.
Can you say that louder, please?
You have no authority to terminate the Director of Elections and
We
Registration
have
Elections.
no authority to terminate the Director of the Department of Registrations and Elections. And the other question that came out of all of these constituent concerns was, and who has the authority to do so?
He reports to a board, and that board is comprised of individuals selected by various party affiliations and our chair that we approve, the chair of that board. But
And
that-
when you say that board, you mean the Board of Registrations and Elections?
That's correct.
Thank you. And who has the authority to remove the chair of the Board of Registrations and Elections?
The chair of the Board of Registration and Elections would only be able to be removed with cause through a process that this board would have to initiate in the Superior Court, where a hearing would have to be held and evidence presented as to what is the nature of the cause for which you're wanting to remove her.
Thank you. And some of the other questions that have come from the constituents are, why were the ballots coming from Arizona? Who actually selected the vendor in Arizona to provide the ballots out to the constituents?
That's under the auspices of the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, thank you. Also, with the Board of Registrations and Elections, or should I say the Department of Registrations and Elections, being responsible for the implementation of these machines, the setting up the polling locations, communicating to the public what the polling locations would be for those voters, why wasn't there a dry run to test the equipment prior to the election? Because the chair of the Board of Registrations and Election mentioned earlier that the machines were taken out and plugged up and many of them didn't work, and we heard a lot of that from even the constituents that showed up this morning, as well as the constituents who have emailed and sent all kinds of DMs and everything. So was there a dry run test done to test this equipment prior to the election or not?
All of the equipment, we do logic and accuracy testing before we send it out. So it is all tested and then sealed up in our warehouse and then delivered out to be set up, to be turned on in the polling locations on the morning of Election Day.
So they're not turned on until the morning of Election Day?
Well, we test them in the warehouse and then we begin delivering them about a week ahead of time.
So what is the process again?
And-
Do you test them before they go into the polling location on Election Day or not?
We test them, yes, before, but sometimes there's a week between the delivery and the time when the poll workers arrive on that morning to turn them on.
So is there a lag in the delivery of the machines that is causing you not to test machines before they get there on Election Day?
We test them, we have to run through a full battery of logic and accuracy tests before we seal up the machines, and then before we send them out. So we make sure that they're operational before we deliver them.
Mr. Barron, what you're saying
and
is, when you
that's-
listen, y'all are making this more difficult than it really is. You test them in the warehouse, then you seal them, and they can't be open until
Right.
the morning of the election,
Correct.
period.
Okay,
Just say that.
thank you. So you test all the equipment a week before they are shipped to the actual polling locations for Election Day. Is that correct?
Yeah, we begin testing usually about 6 weeks before, and then we start sealing them up, and then we deliver them. And then it remains sealed until the poll workers arrive on Election Day morning.
Okay, so then that would say that even after testing them before they went to the polling locations, there unfortunately have been malfunctioning machines that arrived even after you tested them. Is that what you were saying?
No, I don't think, no, I don't believe that they were malfunctioning. I think what the deal is that when the poll workers open those machines up, they have to plug them in to the wall outlets. If too many of them get plugged in along the same circuit, there's a big power drain because you have a ballot marking device and then you have a printer for each one of those. For every 2 of those, you have an uninterruptible power supply. So once you pull all of those, when all the electricity is pulling from those machines, if too many of them are plugged into the same circuit, it can cause some of the things that were happening in some of those locations, which is shimmering screens or black screens, and until you get them plugged into another circuit, they're going to malfunction.
Okay, so that takes me back to, at our previous meeting, Commissioner Hausman actually asked you, Mr. Barron, to ensure that we had the proper type and number of outlets at each location. And if you go back and look at some of the minutes to the previous meetings where we discussed this, that was something she addressed directly with you. So what you just said goes back to, was it poor training of the personnel, or, did they not have any training materials to refer to in the polling locations to tell them that they were doing this incorrectly? I mean, how did we get to Election Day and this being a problem?
I think that it was a combination of, we didn't have in-person training prior to this election. We did most of the training that the poll workers received was in February and March for the presidential preference primary. Then we put together video training for this election. We didn't do in-person training. When you start doing the training, basically, if we would have done in-person training, we probably would have lost more than the 400 to 500 poll workers that we lost, because during that time, many of those poll workers didn't want to come to in-person training, and we could only train so many at a time.
Okay. So earlier, one of you mentioned that you were going to meet with a roundtable of other counties to discuss what the issues were during Election Day and what went wrong. And I think that it would probably be more beneficial if you meet with a constituent body to find out what went wrong, because the experience that the constituents have is most important to really letting us know what we're going to have to address for these next election days. So I would recommend that you think about trying to do something where you get input from the constituents about their experience. I mean, that's just customer service. And do you have a plan for moving forward on how you're going to test the equipment and ensure that these same problems do not happen in the upcoming elections?
Yes, we're going to do in-person training before the August election, but we also plan on making use of teams that are going to go out and help the poll workers make sure that the equipment is plugged into the right places, to make sure that they're turning on, so that we help poll workers with those duties, and make sure we hired 90 techs ahead of the election to have them out in the field. Some of them were assigned directly to precincts, some of them were assigned to rove between different precincts. And we're going to make more use of those technicians and try to get one for each of the precincts so that we have somebody that's assigned there. We're also already soliciting help, and we've been offered help from some of the tech companies and some other organizations about getting some more tech-savvy poll workers in the precincts, because this system does demand much more than the previous one when it comes to operating. You've got iPads, you've got BMDs, you've got printers, you've got backup batteries. There's a lot more involved with it than the previous system. And I think one thing that, we recognize the fact that in-person training hampered everything on Election Day. And that's something that we're going to have to do regardless of what's going on with the pandemic. Some of the decisions that we made at certain times were made during the height of the pandemic concern, when we were, the county was closed, a lot of people were teleworking, and we were trying to manage things and make decisions based upon what we thought happened. I think once the absentee by mail, through the email, we had failures there, that cascaded and brought more turnout to the polling places than we wanted to have. And there were, other things. We lost polling places and poll workers. Those types of things contributed to it. But I think the training that we need to have in person is going to be the key going forward for the poll workers.
And you mentioned that you need a central processing location, and my immediate thought was we bought a 10,000 square foot building at 4700 North Point Parkway that we still don't completely use, and perhaps that might be a location where you can store all this stuff you're talking about and have that central processing location. Also, one of the issues that was raised was that when there was no machine to use, people were given paper ballots, and then there were not enough paper ballots to give the people. So how are you going to address that?
Well, what we're required to do is have at least a 10% backup of paper ballots in the precinct. If you have 10,000 voters assigned, you need to have at least 1,000 emergency paper ballots in the precinct. And we exceeded that number in our precincts. So and then when we went into extended hours, we were still able to use the ballot marking devices, but those ballots then ended up having to be put into envelopes in order to be counted with the provisional ballots. So we will, we anticipated the amount of paper we assigned for the ballot marking devices. We put enough out there for a 60% turnout so that we would have enough reams of paper in each of the precinct to print ballots that day. But we're going to have to look at, in case there's some issue at a precinct, putting more than the required 10% paper ballots out there.
Okay, and as I was receiving this information, I was driving around to different polling locations because I was just astounded that it could even be happening. And a few polling locations ran out of paper. They didn't even have paper to print. So how are you going to address that?
Well, that's what we assigned enough paper for the ballot marking devices to have 60%, for a 60% turnout on Election Day. So there shouldn't have been any precincts that actually ran out of paper.
But they did run out of paper. And then my constituents were saying that they were told 2 days before Election Day that their polling location had changed. And if you look at the calendar, 2 days before Election Day is a Sunday, and that is not appropriate for anyone to get a 2-day notice of their polling location being changed. I also looked at the list of polling locations and drove them and saw that Lutheran Church of the Redeemer on Peachtree was closed, but it was on the list as being open, and then Grady High School was on the list as being open. But what in fact happened was the change took place 2 days before Election Day, that everyone was to go to Park Tavern at Piedmont Park. So how are you going to ensure that we don't have this situation again with these last-minute changes?
Well, what we're going to do is, we're going to go back to all of our polling locations. We had a number of locations, we had 45 changes. That's usually the number of changes that we'll see in a 2-year cycle. We are going to go back to all of them, and we are going to offer decontamination, to have them invoice us afterwards. The most of 44 of those 45 location changes they were all COVID related. They were either senior assisted living centers, or some schools went under renovation. We received word a week and a half before the election from APS that Grady was no longer available. They had committed to having Grady available for us, and that's why we had to move to Park Tavern at the last minute. Most of the other ones that the locations didn't want to have people coming into their facilities. And so we're going to have to offer to pay for the cleaning afterwards in order to induce them to come back.
Mhm. Okay, and my last question is, how were the estimated or expected number of voters determined for each polling location? Because as I looked at the list that noted what the expected number of voters would be at locations, even I was like, okay, this is really low for this particular polling location. And it proved to be true, because we had a much higher turnout at some of the locations where it was supposed to be a lower number. And then it, of course, made sense why you would think that that polling location only needed 1 machine or 2 machines, because the expected turnout was so low, when in fact they needed many more machines than that, and it created a backlog. And especially when you have 3 machines and 2 of them don't work and only 1 does, and now you got triple the number of people coming to vote. So how are you going to address that moving forward?
Well, we allocated ballot marking devices based on the number of voters that were assigned to those locations. We also looked at we knew there was going to be a higher turnout than the 2016 general primary. We looked at the 2018 gubernatorial turnout. We thought it was going to be more in line with that. And we also, leading up to the election, we looked at how many ballots were being returned by precinct, along with the early voting, the early voting turnout, to see how that lined up with it. We allocated all the ballot marking devices according to those numbers, and then we also had to allocate poll pads based on those numbers, which are the check-in stations. We also had to make sure that we had enough poll workers that could staff those check-in locations. We only had a certain amount of poll workers this election. We had far fewer than we wanted, and we did get some towards the end. We had people from the county that were going out. We also had a lot of volunteers towards the end to go out. Everybody that we sent out went through the video training, but we are going to make sure that we have the right allocations, and we'll make sure whatever it is that we have to do with regard to hazard pay to get poll workers, to get the right amount of poll workers out in the field. We're also going to try to increase the number of polling locations by at least 40 for November. But I think if we go back to a full complement of early voting locations, we will be able to drive and do advanced absentee by mail. We will be able to get close to that 80% number of people that are going to vote before Election Day. That's what our goal is. We had 64% in 2016, so I think 80% is doable, especially with absentee by mail increasing.
Well, I would recommend that you definitely work with the organizations out here that want to help. I was contacted several times about, what are we doing to get students, because the students weren't even working or at school because of COVID-19, but there were students who were willing to actually help and do more outreach as far as that's concerned, and a lot of these organizations, because otherwise you're not going to get the help. And I know there were about 40 polling locations that did not want to open because of COVID-19. Is that correct?
Yeah, 44 of the 45.
Okay, so have you heard from any of them this time?
No, we've started contacting them as of this morning.
Okay, all
Yes.
right. All right, thank you very much, and work smarter, not harder, moving forward. I think there's the PPP, I hate to say it, poor planning creates piss poor production. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Arrington, Commissioner Carn, and back to Commissioner Houseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barron, and thank you, Ms. Cooney. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Every time there's something going on with election. I remember a year or two ago, we were supposed to give 2 weeks' notice. And Mr. Barron comes in here and says, well, we sent it out, and we sent one out this week, and we sent one out the following week. It was 7 days. Every time it's an excuse. Every time there is an excuse. It doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense. What it makes sense. It's incompetence is what it is. It is just absolute incompetence. And then to come in and to say it's the Secretary of State or this or that. We have people that were waiting at polling locations since 6 o'clock. They want to go vote early so they can go to work. The lady didn't show up with the keys. She left the keys at home. She had to go back home and get the keys. Is that the Secretary of State's fault? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. Every time we have an election, it's excuse after excuse. And I know you guys are working hard. I know your staff works hard. But, woo, I am tired. I am sick and tired of being sick and tired of the excuses coming out of elections. It doesn't make any sense that we continually have these problems. I understand we had COVID, we had these last-minute location changes. A test run isn't a test run if it's not done at the test facility. I can't test run a machine at my house and then try to go plug it in at a facility. If you haven't plugged it in at that facility, you haven't done a test run. I don't know anything about the chairman's committee, but I'm gonna make a motion right now that this board adopt its own elections committee. The chair can do whatever he wants to, but this board, me, my constituents, and the other board members that are here, we have a responsibility and a duty to have our own commission, to have our own task force. I don't know who's on the chair's task force. I don't know anything about that. I haven't been involved in that process, but I'm gonna be involved in this process by making a motion that this board adopt its own task force. The other task force can do whatever it's gonna do, I don't know. But this board needs a task force, not the chairman. I need one. I have to report to my people. It just does not make any sense. I don't want to go back through it. You guys have heard it. You lived through it. I was running around from location to location, helping get machines set up and running. You obviously need 1,000 more people to help you on election day. You obviously need runners to run from location to location. I shouldn't have to do that. I practice law every day. So I have to leave my law practice to run around and change your machines. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Every time there's an election, the last 2 elections, y'all have more voting locations in North Fulton than you do in South Fulton. I know this board has repeatedly said to the Board of Registration and Elections and to you, Mr. Barron, we want parity. We want the same number of voting locations in South Fulton as y'all put in North Fulton. Why do we keep having to address that issue? Why do y'all keep putting more precincts, early voting precincts in North Fulton? It's racist. Don't do it. If you're going to put precincts on one side of the county, put the same number of precincts on the other side of the county. And then come in here with excuses. Good Lord have mercy. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of having to ask for the same number of voting precincts in South Fulton. I shouldn't have to do that. We've communicated that to you all repeatedly. Why do we still keep having to tell you that? Don't bring that mess in here again. If it was, I know what I would do if it was up to me. It is preposterous. 6-hour lines. Do you understand that making people wait in line for 6 hours makes them not want to vote? Do you understand if I can't vote, if people can't vote before they go to work, they got the rest of their day planned out, they might not be able to vote at all? It's called contingency. It's called double contingency, a triple contingency. If one lady doesn't forgot the keys, where is the second lady with the keys to open it right up? If somebody's late, where is the second and the third person to make sure that that precinct is open on time? It's the same thing that's going on right now with George Floyd. It's not George Floyd. It's Trayvon Martin. It's Jordan Davis. It's Ahmaud Amaru, Breonna. It's people are sick and tired of it. They're sick and tired of all of it. We're sick and tired of all of the excuses from Fulton County registration and elections. We're sick and tired of it. And I don't know, you said to remove, it's got to file a lawsuit. How do we appoint someone else? We don't have to file a lawsuit to appoint somebody.
Madam County Attorney, I can explain the process, but you want to explain it quickly?
The chair is appointed for a particular term, and the term doesn't end to December of this year. And so in order to remove them prior to the end of the term, you'd have to initiate that process for termination of cause.
Oh, but come December, that's good information. So the term is this year, the end of this year.
Our records reflect her as being appointed June 2019 and
Right, June of 2021.
June 2021. It's a 2-year term from the date of appointment.
For all the members?
No, the only one that you appoint is the chairman.
2 members are appointed by the Republican Party of Fulton County. 2 members are appointed by the Democratic Party of Fulton County. Our delegation recommends to us. I met with them. Ms. Cooney had been chair. They had failed to act. I said, look, we've got to have a permanent chair. Went to them. They submitted her name, and she agreed to serve in this, graciously agreed to serve in this capacity through the end of this year.
We need to talk to the legislature about changing that, because I tell you, we have to get through these elections. But come next year, I'm not voting to give any money to registration and election until we get this resolved. I'm sick and tired. Every time it's election, they got more voting locations in North Fulton than in South Fulton. Makes me sick to my stomach. It's inexcusable and it's racist. That's exactly what it is. And there's no excuse for that. I'm done.
Commissioner Carn is next.
Thank you. First of all, there are a lot of hard-working folks working in the elections department, and you know, I think we all truly appreciate their hard work. You know, there are over 1 million residents living here in Fulton County, and most folks don't interact with county government on a daily or a weekly basis at all. But the vast majority of all of our residents pay their hard-earned money in taxes to the county government. And one of the only times that they do have interaction with the government is when they go in to expect a free and fair election without any suppression or difficulties. In other words, this is one of the major touch points of government that every citizen and resident pay their tax money for. So if they can't depend on anything else, they know that they can at least go into that voting booth when election time comes and not get a big hassle and get decent customer service. You know, I guess, you know, with all due respect, I just don't believe that the two of you realize the amount of mistrust in Fulton County government that you all have created based on your performance. You know, I mean, ultimately the question becomes, you know, how important is you doing your duty? How important is your duty for both of y'all? You know, and based on the performance, you know, everybody's scratching their heads here. And throughout the 15 cities of this county. You all's responsibility makes all the wheels go around. Because nobody's paying into their taxes. Nobody's going to be paying their fair share if they don't have representation and a voice when it's time to speak their voice. And that's at the polling precincts. And you two are the only ones responsible for the administration authority over our elections. And, you know, obviously a vast majority of the precinct issues were south of I-20. The difficulties there were far greater than most precincts up north. There were some difficulties up north, but nothing like the difficulties in the predominantly African-American areas. You hear about these type of things. You hear about voter suppression. You hear about voter discrimination. And you wonder, you know, is it a relic of the past? You know, well, in one sense it is, but in one sense it isn't. You know, voter discrimination on its face is not here. No one's at the door saying, well, you're a group of people, you're a different color group of people, you can't come in here and vote. But voter suppression is concealed, it's concealed with your decisions. It's concealed with your mistakes. It's still here. That's the voter suppression now. And that's why, maybe I don't know if you all have the connection of the anger from the performance that you guys did. Because there's no direct voter suppression, well, there is. But it's concealed. It's disguised in your decisions, the decisions you all made. The voter suppression and discrimination are your mistakes. That's where it is. It's the mistakes. You don't discriminate flagrantly out front. You say, oh, well, we're out of paper. That's how you discriminate in 2020. You say, oh, well, there was a mix-up. That's how you discriminate in 2020. You say, well, you got your voter precinct changed 2 days before the election day. That's how you discriminate in 2020. And you guys, the two of you, are making a textbook example of voter discrimination and how you do it, and you can shrug your shoulders and say it was a goof. So I want you all to get an understanding of what we're talking about here and why everybody is so upset, why everybody is so unhappy. Now, obviously, I got more reasons than most to be disappointed in your performance, because your performance reflects upon my performance. People connect Fulton County government with Fulton County elections. People think Fulton County Board of Commissioners have authority over Fulton County elections. They assume that we're making sure we have a responsible elections department. They're assuming that we're going to make sure our elections director and our elections chair are going to do the things required to make sure everybody can vote, to make sure no one's at polling precincts at 2:25 a.m. for early voting. And this isn't something I heard about or I read about. So, I spoke a couple of meetings ago about some of these same issues that everybody's speaking about now. And my only last question, I guess, is I want you to tell me, you told me about all these plans. We've heard plans before about what you're going to do, what you're going to fix. I would like both of you all to tell me about the plans for your public apologies to the 1.3 or whatever we have million residents of Fulton County for your job performance. And I'd also like to know in what form and in how many different forms will this apology be disseminated? So I guess that's the only question I have, and I'd like to hear your answer.
I believe that on election night, we sent out a public statement.
You did.
Thank you. Thanking everybody who waded through the sun and the rain, I remember that phrase, and apologizing. We did that. I have in my computer several hundred emails which I have been trying to respond to personally, which takes a fair amount of time, but it is my intention to respond to each of them personally. And I think the best way to make amends is to get a smooth election in August.
Yeah, on election night, I did make a statement to the public. I've also been doing the same thing as Mary Carroll, which have started to go through all of the emails to make individual apologies to voters. But my thing is that I think that going forward, we have to make sure that we perform in August and then in November in order to instill confidence back in the voting public about, and with the changes that we make, that will go a long way to instilling confidence in the department and in the county.
Well, in closing, Mr. Chair, I don't think either one of those apologies are good enough. the vast majority of Fulton County residents did not hear those apologies. No one I know heard those apologies. And I'd like to see what else you got. Now, in terms of whether or not you can best demonstrate your, your remorse for what happened by yet handling another election, I would dare not assume they have the objective wisdom to make that determination. But the thing of it is the two of you are handling the elections for us, and that's just a fact right now. And I don't know if anyone up here would depend on you to handle anything else for us again, but that's just my opinion. That's all I got, Mr. Chair.
Okay, back to Commissioner Houseman and back to Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, I'll be brief. You know, I don't know what you're saying in your emails where you're apologizing to voters, but I certainly hope that it's not to point the finger at other entities, like I heard you in your opening statements this morning, because I think you've heard every commissioner here has a lack of confidence in the abilities for Fulton County to conduct proper elections, when everything we do rests on what you do. And not just in this government, every city government goes to the state and the federal level. Every person that's elected to represent Fulton County, you manage that. So you've got a lot of weight on your shoulders, and we're just not satisfied. We're just not satisfied. You know, this state became a uniform voting equipment state back in 2002. And we're one of the few states, if not the only state in the country, that has the equipment paid for by the state. So that's a big advantage to us. That allowed us to invest in the operations that we did this time in order to supplement and try to give you everything you needed to do the elections and to do them right. So we did our job, as was said earlier. The state took on the cost of the mailing of the ballots. We didn't have to do that either. We couldn't even enter them into the system in a timely manner, or even keep up with the applications. We lost a lot of them, as you know. So we failed on that regard too. The state provided us with names of poll workers. Did we follow up? Did we use any of the poll workers, the 200 or so that names that they gave us? Do you know?
Those were all passed on to our regional coordinators.
Well, it's my understanding that they were never contacted, so you might want to verify that, because that was 200 vetted poll workers ready to help us that apparently did not, even though they were available. And then there's a lot of talk of voter suppression, and that breaks my heart. You know, I'm a Republican in a Democrat county. Everything about Fulton County is Democrat-run. To hear that we're suppressing the Democrat vote from a Democrat-run administration is just beyond the pale to me. It just makes absolutely no sense that would be happening in Fulton County, Georgia. What do you say to the public? What do you say to the public about that, Mr. Barron, that say we are suppressing the vote?
Oh, I think this election, we've had since I came here, I think we've done a very good job of enfranchising voters through early voting. And that has been the biggest improvement that we have made over the years. We've had up to 24 early voting locations. We used to have 6. We've done the outreach sites. This election presented some different challenges for us that we haven't had before. And I think we made some decisions in April and May that were more based, I think, upon the interests of public health. And we should have, looking back on it, just tried to open up every location that we could have, regardless of what was happening. That's in order to have avoided this. And I know that from speaking with my staff with regard to the emailed applications that were submitted, we are, I think that started the chain reaction. And we're looking at how we're going to improve that service.
Well, we've supported you in every way we can, and we're at a loss. I think if you've heard today, if it was up to us, we'd be making some personnel changes. I hope you can recover from it. I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Okay, Commissioner Hall, followed by Commissioner Arrington.
Okay, I just want to go back to Commissioner Arrington. I want to just be clear, did you make a motion to create a Board of Commissioners approved task force to oversee the elections process and polling locations? Was that a motion?
It was, and I was gonna make it again.
I didn't want it to fall on deaf ears, so I wanted to just raise that back on the floor and second it, because I do agree that we do need a Board of Commission approved task force that has bylaws and everything necessary to act and to report back to this body on exactly what they're seeing and what's necessary to help the Board of Registrations and Elections and the Department of Registrations and Elections, and more so this Board of Commissioners, to know what is needed and necessary to ensure that we have a better election process. And let me just go on record by saying voter suppression is real. It's very real. And so we need to make sure that moving forward, we are going to do everything in our power as far as funding and processes to make this experience for our voters much better than what happened on June 9th. And so I second your motion, Commissioner Arrington.
Thank you.
Welcome.
You can remove me from the queue.
Commissioner Arrington?
You can remove me from the queue. I was going to make the motion again, but no need to at this point.
Okay, do you want to make one? I'll allow you to make it.
He did.
No.
And I seconded.
Yeah.
Okay, you got that?
I do.
All right. There's a motion on the floor for the Board of Commissioners to create a task force, a committee to, I guess, investigate
Oversight.
and report back to the board. Is there a second to properly move and second? Let's vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes. 4 yeas, 2 nays.
Okay, anybody else? Speak?
Question.
Yes.
Vice Chair, is there any funding required for this that you need, or anything in particular? Or do we just let the manager handle that from here on out, or what's your pleasure?
I mean, I assume that we would all appoint 1 or 2 members, depending on the size that we want the task force to be, and that we would work with the clerk's office and the other appointees to the board to make sure that they have the resources that they need.
I just recommend you, I guess you can't add that to your motion, but just so it's clear. Is it clear enough for the record, county manager, so that they understand the structure of it, or do we need to?
All right, let's do this. We got other items to, Vice Chair, why don't you get with you and Mr. Carn, get with the manager, y'all need whatever money you need to get to find it, or we can pay for it out of our budgets, our own budgets, if it's that important. That's probably the way to do it. All right.
From the county attorney, please.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The issue is, I think that there's confusion about what you said originally that you wanted the committee to do, and then the way in which the chairman reflected it. I just want to make certain, is it an oversight committee, which is what you indicated, or is it an investigation task force?
Oversight.
Is an elections task force. And my intent was to have it look at any and all issues from past elections and to make recommendations going forward. Like, for example, there should be a comment box People should be able to put it in their comments, because that way they don't have to email us. They can leave their comments right then and there. But actually, it probably ought to be some laptops or some tablets. Comment box is probably dated at this point. It needs to be input into a data machine. People ought to be able to make comments right then and there while they're waiting in line. There's nobody there, no greeters. It's just people waiting in line. Nobody to say, hey, wait a minute. I mean, it's a fiasco.
Okay, it's approved. Commissioner Morris?
I still have a minute or so left, I think.
Yeah, I have 10.
Some folks have made some comments about how we all want this or that and would make personnel changes or whatever, and I just want to make it real clear that I understand the challenges your department had. And I've known Ms. Cooney since you were a little girl in law school 40-something years ago. There's no finer public servant that I know of than Mary Carroll Cooney, and I just want to thank you for this thankless job that you've had and the tough challenges. And I don't know anybody that could have done much better, unless you were omniscient and foresee some of this stuff. So I know that'll probably spark a lot of comments, but I just want to make that statement to you both.
Thank you. Just give me a couple of minutes, and I want to second what you said. I worked with Ms. Cooney when she was a city attorney, as a matter of fact, so I could not agree with you more, Commissioner Morris, and that's why I recommended her to the delegation first and to this body, and she was approved unanimously, and I still support you. But there are times, though, when heads should roll and top staff should be replaced. But this is not one of them, in my judgment. It's mid-June, and the runoffs from this election will be starting with early voting on July 20th. Runoff day, August 11th. I'm satisfied that the task force, actually there are two, I guess there are three now. The manager has an internal task force which is working. I have one that's made up of private citizens. We have our first meeting tomorrow, and we will be providing direction, constructive direction. I want to fix it. I'm not in the finger-pointing game. And we can fix it, and we will fix it. Sure, there were problems. Now, I was a commissioner in 2012. I think I'm the only one up here who was a commissioner in 2012 when the elections director was fired 5 months before that presidential election. You were here then? Okay. And I can tell you that that election was a disaster as a result of that. The lack of leadership. Get somebody in place. I know that there's a feeling that you need to do something. It's like most of us play some kind of ball, and when the team's not doing well, you're going to fire the coach or the manager or make some changes. You feel you have to do something. But if we act in that direction, that manner, the consequences can be really dire for us. But back then, we were, I believe it was Gloria Champion who had been the director for many, many years, a very accomplished woman who retired, very experienced, left with a lot of institutional knowledge. We don't seem to appreciate institutional knowledge anymore, but it's important. She was replaced by Mr. Barry Garner. Mr. Garner was on the job from July 2009 to 2011. He got run off because of a sexual harassment suit. He was replaced by Sam Westmoreland. Sam Westmoreland had been a member of the Board of Registration and Elections, wanted the job of director. We had a search. He finished last in the search. In fact, one of the top people who finished that time was Gordon Joyner at the top. But because of internal politics, Mr. Westmoreland ended up getting the job. There was an election that happened going on. We couldn't find Mr. Westmoreland. These are facts. Looking all over for Mr. Westmoreland. Where was he? He was in the Alpharetta jail, drunk. 2 interim directors who did an outstanding job, and they're still employed by Fulton County today. Bridget Bailey. Don't tell me y'all don't know Bridget Bailey, but every time I mention the name, nobody seems to know who I'm talking about. But Bridget Bailey, April Pye. Outstanding job. Still in the employ of Fulton County. Then we went to another full-time director, Sharon Mitchell, came from Florida, great talker. Not a good worker, though. We ended up running her off and had to settle, financial settlement with her. Then come 2013, voila, Mr. Barron. My point simply is we've had some issues, but I think it would be a mistake. I understand that a bill or bills have been dropped across the street to replace the whole board. If you're going to do it, replace Mary Carol Cooney, replace Rick Barron, replace the other 4, run them all off and start all over. Terrible mistake. Secretary of State has some legislation now. But I think we need to stand up, stand behind this Board of Registration and Elections and get it right now. And I think we can do that. And I'm committed to getting the situation, to fixing the situation so that the runoff will run smoothly, and more importantly, the November election will run smoothly. And I think that we have the personnel, we have the will, we have the mental capacity and the willingness to do it. If we just forget about the finger pointing and get the job done. So I guess it was Gomer Powell or somebody. That's all I have to say about this. I just hope that we will let tempers cool down. I know that there's a lot of discussion going on at the state legislature level. I met with probably every member of our delegation. They're concerned. They feel frustrated. They feel that they have to do something. Well, sometimes doing something is the wrong thing to do. I think we know what happened, and we also know how to fix the problem. So work with us, work with them and their team to fix the problem. Continue, Madam Clerk.
Continuing on page 9,